Well, let's talk a little bit about valuation and market analysis. Appraisal basically is what we're going to be talking about here. Now, a couple things before we can get started. Number one, this chapter is not, there's no intention here to try to teach you how to be an appraiser. You will not know any more about appraising a property when we finish this chapter than you do right now. Okay, now if you're already an appraiser, then this should be a breeze for you. So anyway, yeah, obviously, but valuation is very important, and the reason we're even looking at it from an appraisal standpoint, because we're not appraisers. Now will tell you, I am an appraiser. I'm also a broker in charge, but I'm also also an appraiser. So, but most real estate agents are not appraisers. So you should not try to act like one. Again, just like anything else. You're not an attorney, don't try to act like it. You're not an accountant, don't try to act like it. Same thing with appraisal. So why are we even going over this? Well, because valuation's a big part of real estate, right? You will need to know how to put a price, a list price, sales price on the property you're selling. You need to know how to do that. It's just you can't call it an appraisal. Be careful with that. In fact, good chance you'll get a question on the exam to this effect. But if you're not a licensed appraiser, you can't hold out any of your work or analysis as if it were an appraisal. You can't call it an appraisal. Stop, don't do that. That will get you in trouble. So what we as real estate agents do, we will do some analysis, and it's some of the same analysis appraisers will do. It's just not going to be in near the detail and as in depth as what an appraiser might be doing. Okay, so we're not going to be getting into the weeds. And if you are an appraiser, just keep in mind this is not an appraisal course. This is a real estate course, and we're just going over some very basic things to try to understand that will help us to do what we refer to as a CMA, or comparable market analysis. I'll get it out. So we call it a market analysis as real estate agents. That's what we're going to do, but using some of the same techniques that appraisers would be using as well. All right, so some of the things we're going to be talking about in this chapter, obviously you got to know what value is. And I can assure you, for most people, it's not what you're thinking. How do you estimate value? How do we do this market analysis I was just referring to? This competitive market analysis. Sometimes you hear it called comparable market analysis. There's a slight difference between the two. Not that big a deal. We're not going to worry about it. So whether you call it competitive market analysis or comparable market analysis, we're going to just use whichever suits you the best. How about that? And then when is the appraisal by a certified appraiser? When is that required? When must you have an actual appraisal done? So we'll get into some of this stuff as we go through. But let's start out like we do with most chapters and just go over the terms and definitions that are important to understand as we go through. What is an appraisal? It's an estimate or opinion of value. Now, which is it? Is it an estimate of value or is it an opinion of value? And does it matter? It really does, I think, but let me kind of explain why we've got it like this. For years, the Appraisal Institute defined an appraisal as an estimate of value. But the Appraisal Institute has decided that's not really the right word to use here. So the Appraisal Institute decided to change from estimate to opinion. It's now considered an opinion of value. Now, the reason I'm bringing up both is because honestly, I'm not sure what the state exam or how they're asking it. My guess is they could very well ask you what is an appraisal. And, I would be looking for either one of these two. It's either an estimate or an opinion of value. Okay, obviously they can't give you both because that's not right. But I will tell you, the term now we use is opinion of value. But don't be shocked if estimate is still used on the test. All right, so if we know it's an opinion of value, then whose opinion are we referring to? Obviously, that's the opinion of the appraiser. This is so if I do an appraisal on the property, whatever my end number is, that's my opinion. Now, could you get 3, 4, 5 different appraisers to come out, and each appraiser have a different opinion of value? It'd be according to each appraiser, it's worth more or less than what the other one thinks. Is that possible? You bet it is. Absolutely. Because value is it's not a number per se. And we're going to talk about that some more in a little bit, so I'm not going to get into it right now. But my point is this. Could I appraise a house and put $200,000? Another appraiser thinks it's worth $220,000. Another appraiser thinks it's worth $190,000. So there's, how can we have such a fluctuation here between the appraisers? Because it's an opinion of value. Each appraiser may have a different opinion. Now, what should be the same, the standards that I use to arrive at my opinion should be the same standards that every appraiser has to use. So we all have to use the same standard in developing our opinion. But it could vary a little bit. Now look, it shouldn't be a great big difference in the value from one appraiser to the next, although it happens. It happens. Appraisers are human too. Sometimes one appraiser missed something. Maybe another appraiser just went way overboard on something. But we're human. Things like that happen. But I want you to understand what an opinion of value means. But then you see where it gets into, well, what is the purpose and or what is the function of an appraisal? Because I'm going to tell you, obviously the appraiser needs to determine that. We got to answer that question to be able to develop the accurate or correct opinion of value. Now, why is that? Because, there are many different types of value, which you're going to see here in just a second. And depending on what you intend to do with the appraisal, if, for example, you call me wanting me to appraise your house, then I'm going to ask you, why? What are you trying to accomplish here? What are you trying to complete or whatever? And I have to know that, because you might be thinking, look, and you're going to see the different types of values here in a little bit, but I want to make sure that I appraise it based on the correct value for what you're trying to achieve. Okay, and I'll just leave it at that for right now until we get into these other types of value. But there are many different types, and the type will determine or will be determined according to what you intend to do. What are you trying to accomplish? Okay. Now, one type of value, in fact, the most common, if not the only type of value that real estate agents are concerned with is called market value. What's the most probable price in a competitive and open market? I'm going to tell you, there's a lot of times real estate agents and appraisers really bump heads here a lot. I get calls all the time. Well, I'll say all the time, but not all the time. But it's not unusual for me to get a call from a real estate agent after I've provided an appraisal. And basically they want to argue what I appraise it for. They think it's worth much more. I don't know that I've ever had anybody call me and say, no, this property is not worth anywhere near that, Frankie. No, it's you, because they think it's worth a lot more. And here's the most common excuse I hear to justify the agent and or seller's opinion. Frankie, this house is under contract for $300,000. And by definition, the value is whatever the buyer would be willing to pay for it. Well, it's under contract for $300,000. So the buyer obviously is willing to pay $300,000 for this property. You've only got it appraised at $270,000. That's not right. There's no way it's only worth $270 if we have a willing and able buyer willing to pay $300,000. Nope, that's not going to work. Look, let's look at these two bullets under market value. It says it's the most probable price in a competitive and open market under conditions of a fair sale, with buyer and seller acting knowledgeably and prudently. And I will tell you, if you read the definition of market value according to the Appraisal Institute, it's almost a full page. It's a very long definition. But also part of that definition states that basically it's not what would a buyer be willing to pay for the house. My job, or an appraiser's job, is to determine what would the typical buyer be willing to pay for the house. It's not unusual to have one or maybe two buyers that would be willing to pay way more than what most people would be willing to pay, because maybe they just want it for other reasons. They want it, and I'd be willing to pay more than what it's worth to get it. Well, just because you have a buyer willing to pay more, that's not representative of the market. That's not what the market would be willing to pay. And the appraiser's job is to figure out what would the typical buyer. The typical buyer represents the market, not a buyer. So we want to be careful with this a little bit. So again, I don't want to get into the weeds, but some of this stuff I think is important to understand. All right. So that's market value. What would the typical buyer be willing to pay? Well, here are just a few of the many different types of value that we could come up with by doing an appraisal. Obviously, market value, we just talked about that. Tax value, insurable value, investment value, replacement value, salvage value. And these are just some examples. There are more than this. But this is why I need to know what's the purpose or function. How do you intend to use this appraisal that I'm going to prepare for you? Because if I don't know what you're trying to accomplish, then I don't know what type of value to come up with. I will tell you, just for example, there's a difference between market value and insurable value. Insurable value, who cares about that? The insurance company, the company that's going to insure the property. That's really based more on the cost. What the insurance companies, all they're thinking about, I don't care what you could sell it for. All I care about is how much would it cost to replace it if it burnt down. That's all. That's what I want to know. It might sell for a lot more. It might be worth a lot more than what it actually costs to build it. It may not be worth as much as what it would cost to build it. Anyway, so that's just some examples of the many types of value. You need to understand this term called market equilibrium. And I think that's kind of common sense. Y'all think equilibrium means everything's equal. Y'all, supply equals demand. Now, I will tell you, from at least in my experience in our market, that's kind of rare. We don't see this a lot, but yeah, it means there's the same number of buyers that's equal to the number of sellers, right? There's enough demand to meet the supply. There's enough supply to meet the demand. Well, when you get in a market like that, y'all, typically prices just don't change. They're kind of stagnant. They stay right there because, we're in a market of equilibrium. It's not a buyer's market. It's not a seller's market. Now, I will tell you, again, that's not very common, at least in the market that I tend to work in. I will tell, just for example, as of the date of this video, we're still in a pretty significant seller's market, which is why home prices are up, and they're staying up. Even though interest rates are going up, the prices are going up. Why is that? Because there's little supply. Not many people are wanting to sell their house, for a number of reasons. I won't get into all that. But when you have limited supply, in other words, you got a lot more buyers than you have houses to buy, that's going to create a higher price. Okay, well, we got 8 buyers that want this house. Well, which one of you is going to pay more for it? So, anyway, but that's what equilibrium is. Here's where we get into trouble if you're not careful. Price. What is price? Price is what you paid for something. Is price and value the same thing? Absolutely not. Please remember this. Well, not only for test purposes, but probably even more so when you get out there and start practicing real estate. I hear this like all the time. All the time. Sellers always tell me, hey, look, we just put this pool in the yard for $50,000. That's what it cost, $50,000. We just put a new roof on the house. That was $15,000. We just added a sunroom on the back of the house. That was $50,000. And they're always telling me how much they paid for all the stuff that they've done. Well, I think most people would agree. Just because you put a sunroom on your house or added a sunroom and it cost you $50,000 to put it there, does that mean your house is now worth $50,000 more than it was before you put the sunroom there? No, absolutely not. Now, look, it may be worth more than the $50,000 you paid for it. But there's a big difference between price and value. And when we're trying to figure out how much we can sell something for, it's based on the value, not the price. What would the typical buyer be willing to pay? Now, obviously, if you put that sunroom there and you paid $50,000, then obviously you believed, if you were the homeowner, you believed it was worth $50,000. That's why you were willing to spend that. But another buyer might say, no, I like a sunroom. They're okay. I wouldn't mind having it, but I'm not paying $50,000 to get it. They might say, I might be willing to pay $20,000 for it or $30,000, but I'm not paying $50,000. It's just not worth that to me. Well, if we find out that's the mindset of the most buyers, then guess what? Even though the price was $50,000, you've only increased your value by $20,000 to $30,000. Okay? Probably the biggest example of that I think most people get, again, is the pool. I think most people understand in most markets, this is not all markets, so don't be yelling at me. I know it could be different in your market. But in most markets, I'm just telling you what it costs to put a pool in your yard, an in-ground pool, is not going to create that same amount of value. It's just not in most cases. Now, I'm well aware there are some areas. In fact, if you don't have a pool, you might not even be able to sell the house. Buyers say, I know, I want a house with a pool. And I'm not buying a house that doesn't have one. Well, then that's going to hurt you in value if you don't have a pool. But at least in my market, we're not there yet. Most people consider that a huge luxury and not willing to pay what it would cost to actually have it. Okay, so hopefully you understand, there's a big difference between price and value. And what I was saying earlier, what I want you to be careful of is when you get ready to put the property on the market, and the sellers told you all this stuff they've just done to the house and how much they paid to put it there or to change it or replace whatever. If you're valuing that property based on all this, what it cost or what the seller paid to do stuff, you're probably going to be way overpriced. Probably going to be way overpriced. It's just not going to sell because you didn't list it according to the value. Okay, moving on. So then what is this comparative or competitive market analysis, or CMA? Again, this is something we call our analysis because we can't, I say we as real estate agents, we cannot use the term appraisal. You can't say, well, I did this analysis and I'm appraising it for X amount. You're going to get in trouble if you use the term appraisal and you're not an appraiser. And I mean a licensed appraiser. Stay away from that. So, this is just another term that we use as real estate agents, this market analysis. But, to develop the market analysis, we're going to utilize what we call the sales comparison approach. This is one of 3 approaches that an appraiser is going to use to put a value on the property. But this is the one that real estate agents tend to use, sales comparison. So basically, just, and again, in a nutshell, if I've got a house that I'm getting ready to sell, and I can find 3, 4, maybe 5 other houses that are very similar to this house, and these other houses have recently sold. So we're talking about houses all in the same location. They have recently sold. They're very similar to the one I'm trying to sell. Well, if I know what these other houses around me are selling for, shouldn't that give you a really good idea of what you could expect this one to sell for? Absolutely. That's what we call sales comparison. We're trying to find out what houses here nearby have recently sold and what did they sell for, right? Because if I know what those sell for, I should know pretty close to what this one should sell for. Now, there are some other things you have to consider and look at. I will just tell you, you can't find 3 houses, for example, that have recently sold and then just take the 3 sales prices, average them up, and say, voila, here you go. That is not the way you value real estate. Even though I'm fully aware that's what a lot of agents do. But they're doing it that way because they don't understand. They don't know what they're doing, and this is really can cause a lot of problems. It really can. Or quite frankly, what a lot of other real estate agents will do, they'll say, well, the one that sold for the most was this amount, and that's the number we're going with. If that house sold for this, that's what we're going to sell this one for. We just go with the highest sales price. And that may wind up being a good idea. But I'm just telling you, if you're just doing it because you want the highest sales price, good chance you're going to have problems with that too. We're going to actually go into and talk about, probably in the next hour, but we're going to look at all 3 of the approaches to value. Obviously one of them being the sales comparison approach. And we're going to look at it and kind of dig a little bit deeper into that. But for now, just know when you're doing a market analysis, which approach to value will you use or might be the best to use if you're trying to figure out the value of a residential or any kind of property for that matter. Y'all sales comparison. All right. And then, I think this is towards the end of the definitions, but really what you're looking at here there are two acronyms that deal with appraisals. And my guess is they're going to ask you what these acronyms mean for at least one, if not both of these, because they're really both kind of important. But really, all you need to really know is what is it, what does it stand for? Y'all, MAI is the acronym for Member of the Appraisal Institute. That's it. That's all you need to worry about for that. And then that next one is USPAP, which that's the acronym for Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice. Now, USPAP, is close to is kind of like the appraiser's license law. Now, let me be very clear. This is not law. I want to make sure you hear that. But it's kind of mandatory for appraisers. Because if you just look at the name of it, Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice. The Appraisal Institute has developed standards that are uniform across the board that all appraisers should be adhering to. There are a few exceptions when you might not comply with these standards, but I will tell you for what we're dealing with, appraisers must comply with the standards identified in USPAP. All right? And it kind of goes back to what I was saying a little bit earlier. If every appraiser is appraising the same property and using the same standards, even though we may have a slightly different opinion of the overall value, we should be relatively close. Assuming we all use the same standard. And that's all USPAP is really designed to do, is just to create a uniform standard that we all use when we're developing our opinion of value. That's it. That's what we're doing. All right. So a few things we need to understand again about value, and here we're talking about the difference between market value versus market price. And I really kind of already beat that up, so I don't know that we need to say a lot more there. We know there's a big difference between value and price. Value is what would the typical buyer be willing to pay for something. Price is what you paid for something. And just because you paid that amount does not mean most other buyers would be willing to pay that. Okay? So there's a big difference between price and value. And when we're talking about doing an appraisal, we're looking for value, not price. Okay? At least most of the time. Here we're looking at these, what we consider to be essential elements of value. In fact, there's even an acronym there if that helps you to remember these four elements of value, called DUST. Demand, utility, scarcity, and transferability. That's a memory item right there. They will likely ask you a question in some way to make sure you know what the essential elements of value would be. Obviously, demand. If you got a lot of buyers on the market and very few homes for sale, that's going to drive up the value, right? The buyers are going to be willing to pay more because there's not a lot of inventory. There's not much to choose from, and because I'm competing against several other buyers, then I'm going to have to pay more. So, that supply and demand, if you will, which in fact, if you look at that third bullet, scarcity, those two, demand and scarcity work together. They're referring to supply and demand. If you got a lot of supply, a lot of houses for sale, and not that many buyers, then then that's a buyer's market, and that's going to have a negative impact or effect on the value of real estate. It will start coming down when you reach that point. But as long as you have fewer homes on the market than you have buyers that are looking, that means you got a lot more demand than supply. That's going to create or drive prices back up. So value will fluctuate. And so you got to keep up with what the market is doing over a period of time. Then utility. How can you use the property? The more I can do, the more, what's the word I'm looking for? The more options I have with this property in terms of how I can use it, the utility, the more value it brings, it creates for the buyer. Does it have everything I want, or does it have a few things but not most of what I want? I will tell you, there are a lot of people, especially in a seller's market, a buyer may have to just settle for something. I need somewhere to live now, and here's a list of all the things I would like, in the house, but that's not available. So I may have to go with something that just has maybe a few of the things I want, and I'll have to just do without some of the other things, at least for the time being. Right? That's what they're referring to when they talk about utility, and that will affect the value. And then lastly is the transferability. I may absolutely love this property or the house, but if you don't have the means to convey title to me, then obviously it's worth nothing to me. If you can't convey the title to me for whatever reason, then there's absolutely no value as far as I'm concerned. But as long as you can transfer the title, all the ownership rights, that creates more value. So anyway, make sure you know what these elements of value are. Again, if it helps, that acronym DUST. I would tell, I'm just not a big fan of acronyms. That's why I don't even use them much. In fact, I put this one on here because it's just so common. But here's what you better be careful of. This was my experience when I've taken tests. If the acronym helps to remember something, that's fine. But you better remember what that acronym stands for. Because for example, I remember, and that's been a few years, but I remember getting a question like that on the test I took. What are the essential elements of value? Well, that's dust. So I just went looking at my multiple choice options to figure out, which one of these elements would fit into dust. And wouldn't you know it, all four of my options would fit into the acronym DUST. Well, then that didn't help me one bit. So apparently, if you and I now know there's an acronym for these elements called DUST, so does the person writing the question. They know it too. So again, if it helps, fine. But don't just go in just knowing DUST. You better know what DUST stands for. Okay? All right, moving on. So now we want to take a look at some of these economic principles that affect value. And again, we're not going to get deep. We're not going to get into the weeds on any of these. But one thing I do want you to understand, appraisers have to consider all of these principles we're getting ready to talk about. When I say consider, in fact, it must be addressed in the appraisal. Here's what I found. For example, here's supply and demand. Here's what I find concerning supply and demand, and here's how it has affected the market. And you got to explain all this stuff for each one of these principles. I'm just telling you, real estate agents certainly don't consider all of these principles. But I'd be shocked if most agents even think about more than maybe a couple of them. There's a couple of them I think most real estate agents consider, But we don't consider all these, not as real estate agents. Again, because we're not appraisers. And I'm not trying to suggest you need to get this in depth if you're doing a market analysis as a real estate agent. But appraisers have to get into the weeds here, which could have a lot to do with why maybe a lot of times real estate agents just totally disagree with what appraisers are doing or what the appraiser's opinion and value is. Because we had to get a lot deeper into the weeds than you are. And what I'm finding in these weeds may not be good in terms of what you were hoping for, right? But all this stuff has to be considered, y'all. It's the standard. So let's look at what some of these principles are. Y'all, supply and demand. We just got through talking about that. Y'all, it's a big deal. Y'all, if you got a lot of properties for sale and very few buyers buying, y'all, that's going to drive the prices down. But y'all, if you got a lot of buyers and very few houses, then that's going to drive the prices up. So we got to figure out, are we more so in a buyer's market, or is this more so a seller's market? Or are we in a market of equilibrium? We were talking about that a little bit earlier. Now, I will tell you again, that equilibrium is very, if we do hit it, usually we don't stay there very long. I can assure you, not in the market that I'm used to working in anyway. But you got to pay attention to this. Especially, when you're looking at what houses sold for here recently, you're doing the sales comparison approach, and you see that they sold for however much, you need to pay attention to, what kind of market, let's say it was 6 months ago, 4 to 6 months ago that these 3 or 4 houses sold very close by. Well, what kind of market were you in 4 to 6 months ago? You might have been in a seller's market, meaning, these 3 or 4 houses sold, but they were the only ones for sale. They were the only ones for sale. But here we are 4 months, 5 months, 6 months later, and now there's 6, 7, 8 other houses currently on the market. That means you've got a lot more competition. So if you're putting your house on the market today, you got a lot more competition because you got a lot of other houses that are already for sale. You're not going to sell your house, even though it's very similar to the ones that sold 4 to 6 months ago. You're not going to sell for the same price those sold for because you're in 2 different markets. You're now in a buyer's market, which is going to drive the prices down. Okay? So you got to pay attention to this supply and demand. It's a big deal. Big deal. All right. There's the principle of highest and best use. Again, without getting too technical here, as an appraiser, we have to, obviously this is a question we have to answer. Is this property currently being used as its highest and best use? Is this the highest and best use for this property? For example, if I've got a residential home, but it's sitting on a lot or parcel of land that is now zoned commercial, then this property is, it's not going to appraise for as much as it would appraise for if it was a commercial property on the land. Because, we have to, first of all, we have to determine, is the property or building, if I can use it, let me say it that way. Is the building that's on this land, is that building legally permissible? Well, if it's a residential home and the land is zoned commercial, then that's not legally permissible. That's going to have a huge impact on the value, right? Now, if we maybe tore the house down and put a new commercial building, something that was now legally permissible, that's going to create a lot more value. So, these are just things, again, that we have to consider as an appraiser, where, again, it just seems like real estate agents don't think about stuff like that. I run into it all the time. where quite frankly, they're thinking completely backwards, both real estate agent and the seller. Y'all, I've actually had sellers tell me that their property should be worth way more than what I appraised it for because it's commercial. It's now zoned commercial. Okay, well, I get that. And if you get rid of that residential property and make it legally permissible, then we can talk. But right now, you're not selling a legally permissible improvement that's attached to this property. Why would anybody be willing to pay full commercial price for something, knowing that once they buy it, before they can do anything with it, they're either going to have to tear what's there out and rebuild, or spend a lot of money converting a residential property into commercial property. And I will tell you, that's expensive. I've done it. So I can tell you, it is not cheap to turn a residential property into commercial, because they have different codes, building codes. And I'm telling you, and they are drastically different. And it can cost a lot of money to get it converted over to where it's now legally permissible to be used on this property. So just keep that in mind. Should be okay. Then you see the principle of substitution. I think this is one of the other principles that hopefully real estate agents are considering. They may not realize what they're doing, but I think most of us consider this principle. The principle of substitution. That's what we're really doing when we're doing the sales comparison approach. I'm in essence, and again, I'm being very, very not into the weeds when I'm trying to explain this. So, but what I'm looking for, when I said earlier, we're looking for similar homes that have recently sold in the area. Another way to say that is I'm looking for homes that would almost substitute one for the other. If this house, 3 or 4 houses down from the house I'm trying to sell, recently sold, it is so similar that one would almost substitute for the other. That's what I'm looking for. But I will tell you, that's typically not very reasonable. There's a difference between finding 2 properties that are similar versus 2 properties that are identical. Good luck finding another property identical. I'm not going to sit here and say it doesn't exist, but I'm telling you it's rare. Well, there may be some differences, and we'll have to make adjustments for whatever the differences are between the 2 parties. And we'll be getting into that a lot more so in the next hour. But anyway, that's what we're doing under this principle of substitution. The theory under this principle is that the typical buyer is not going to be willing to pay any more for this property than what a typical buyer paid for basically a substitute property here nearby. That's all we're saying there. All right. But now we look at this principle of contribution. Now I will tell you, this is a big one that I wish real estate agents paid more attention to. And let me just give you an example of how and why this is or could be an issue. Let's say you're looking at selling a house that's in a neighborhood subdivision, and you're looking for similar houses that have recently sold, and there are none. And I will tell you, in this market today, that is not unusual. Just not a lot of inventory. The number of sales have dropped from what is normal. But anyway, so you may not have any sales. And I will tell you, if you don't have any sales, you better be careful about how you go about your market analysis. But anyway, there just really aren't any comparable sales in this neighborhood. Well, fortunately, right across the street from this neighborhood now it's a different neighborhood, it's a different subdivision, 2 different ones. But there are 3 or 4 houses right across the street that have recently sold. Now, they are very similar houses. In fact, maybe built by the exact same builder. So they're very similar houses, same age. Everything's very similar. It's just some are, this other neighborhood's on one side of the street, this one's on this side of the street. And again, they're two different subdivisions. But we decided to use those 3 sales across the street as comparable properties. But what you did not consider was this. In that neighborhood across the street, they have a community pool, community tennis courts, community playgrounds, and maybe even more than that. Where in the neighborhood on the other side of the street has none of that. They just don't have any of that. Well, in that neighborhood that has a pool and tennis courts, clubhouse, whatever, those things contribute to the overall value of the entire neighborhood. Well, if you don't have those items in the neighborhood you're in, then you're not going to get the same value. So you could actually have 2 identical houses, but one of them has access and able to use a pool, tennis court, club, all this stuff. That's going to create additional value for this house that this house does not get. You got to pay attention to that. We call that the principle of contribution. Is there anything that's contributing to the value of one property that another property is not getting? You got to pay attention to that. I'm just telling you, that's a big deal. And then the principle of change. I'm sure everybody's heard this before, but there's only one thing that's constant in the world, and what is that? Change. We're always changing. The market is always changing. What you're doing today is not what you're going to do tomorrow. Because things change. Same thing with real estate. What a property was worth 3 months ago is not necessarily what it's going to be worth today because of changes in the market. The question is it currently the market in decline? Prices are going down? Or are we in a period of what we consider revitalization, which means property values are now on the upswing? And again, whichever one it's in today does not mean that's what it's going to be doing tomorrow. So you got to stay attuned to what the market is doing. There are a lot of things that affect the market. Inflation. Right now, as of this recording, inflation is an issue across the country. The economy, fuel, gas prices. It's just a lot of things that affect the market, right? So you just got to be aware and be paying attention to a lot of this stuff as we go through.